So tonight is going to be part 2 of the evidence of ourselves. And just give you a real quick recap. What we talked about with part 1 was how we as a creation is an evidence of God's existence. And as we've been talking about the last several lessons, we don't have proof that God exists. God has not left proof of his existence because he wants people to accept him by faith. However, just because we don't have proof of God's existence, it doesn't mean that he hasn't left evidence of his existence. And so if you think about the very fact that, like for example, if you were to, walk through a snowy yard and build a snowman, that doesn't necessarily prove that you were there and did it, right? But there's evidence of what you did, right? So we've got God's existence, and there's always going to be something out there somebody's going to say, well, you know what? Even though you say this, there's that. There's evidence of God's existence, of the fact that God has done things. He has created the universe, and so there's evidence of his creation or his existence through the creator. He's created us, and so there's evidence of that creation, and that's what we're kind of looking at, is just simply saying, hey, you know what? We believe, but we have very good reason to believe because of this evidence. So that was kind of last week of taking a look at the evidence of ourselves as being creation. What we're going to be looking at tonight, however, is just simply talking about the importance of understanding the biblical account of creation, and most importantly, the biblical account of ourselves and how we are created. I think that it's important for us to know this and understand it and believe it. I wish more people would. I overheard, I think it was Olga, having a conversation with Ben earlier about people in the country used to be, we had a stronger belief in God, and surprisingly enough, with our stronger belief in God, we had a whole lot more morals than intact. And I think that it's without mistake that as our belief in God has digressed in this country, our morals have digressed, and as our morals digress, then all kinds of the other problems like crime and everything like that is on the rise. So, okay. So anyway, that's what we're going to talk about tonight, though, is we're going to be talking about how and why it's very important for us as Christians to understand what Genesis says and to at least have that understanding about what we believe and why we believe it and the importance of it. But before we get into that, does anybody have any comments or questions from last week's lesson? No? Okay. All right. Well, let's just see what you think. So in our first little section there of what do you think, what do you do when someone asks a question about something that you don't have an answer? Just anything. Somebody comes up and asks you a question, you don't have an answer for their question, what do you do? That's easy enough. I don't know.
I don't know now, but let me get back with you when I do know.
Okay, there's another one, so I don't know. So well, I don't know, but I'll find out for you. Right?
Tell them Google it.
Well, go Google it. Okay, that's a new one. Ben, I'm surprised you that one's coming from you. Okay, so there's something to say. What else? Do you ever? I don't think this would be anybody in the room, but do you ever make something up because you don't want to feel stupid?
Probably.
Yeah. Some people may, yeah, especially if it's, not something very important, okay? When somebody just has a question, you don't know the answer to it, and if you stop and think about it, there's bound to be questions out there that you don't know really, because we don't know everything. So you're bound to run into a question that you don't know the answer to. And, there are different ways that people respond to it. I think that one way that people should respond to it is just simply, I don't know. Some of us don't like to say, I don't know. But if you stop and think about it, I don't know is a very legitimate answer, isn't it? And to be honest with you, I wish that more people would use I don't know than to some of the other things that people come up with, right? Okay. Here's another question for you, and this is in regards to creation, and that is, do we have to have perfect knowledge in order to have perfect faith? No, not at all. As a matter of fact, if you stop and think about it, if we had perfect knowledge, would we even have faith at all? No, we would not, because faith is believing in something when you have the evidence of it, but you don't have the full picture, right? If you've got the full picture, you don't need to have the faith to believe what you've been told about it. And so the reason why I want to bring this up is because I think that sometimes we get into the point of saying, well, I need to have all of this information that's out there, or I need to have answers about all of this information, and so I can have better faith. But really, you don't need that in order to have faith. What you need to have is you've got to have an understanding of God's Word. When you have an understanding of God's Word and what God has left us, then we can have faith, and we can have a very strong faith. We can have very pure faith. We can have a very true and genuine faith. And so, a lot of the things that we were talking about last week before, as far as, different scientific evidence of this and that and different things that are going on. Some of the things that we're talking about tonight, we don't have to know these things in order to believe. And so that's why it's so very important for us to, first of all, when we're coming up and we come up with questions, whether somebody asks us something or maybe just something that is presented to us. It doesn't have to be from a personal question. It might be from watching something on the internet somewhere. It could be something, something we see in TV or something that just kind of pops into our brains about something. Overhear something in casual conversation that makes us kind of think about something. When we have questions that we don't have answers to, it's okay to say, I don't know. Okay? It's okay to say, I don't know about that, but I do know about this, right? I don't know about all of those other things, but I do know about this. Some people are going to say, when they hear us say that, they're going to say, oh, well, you're ignorant about it, you're stupid, you're everything. But, the truth of the matter is that as long as we have a understanding and a belief on something that's firm and solid and true, then it really doesn't matter what all the other things are, right? Okay. All right. Before we get into some of our points to know, though, let's just go back to the book of Genesis chapter 1, and let's just have a real quick review of the biblical account of creation, right? So, take a look, Genesis chapter 1. In Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1, everybody can quote it, right? Most people at least talk about the very first words of it, right? In the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, let there be. And then all of a sudden we have these days of creation. And so this little graphic up here to kind of speed us through chapter 1. What we see is on the very first day we have light. And so first day God separated the light from the darkness. And you notice what he did was that when he separated the light from the darkness, he called the light day, he called the darkness night. And notice at the very end of verse number 5, it says, and there was evening and there was morning the first day. And so let me ask you a little bit of a question here. At what point does time start to be counted in the book of Genesis?
When there was light.
Well, really, I'm aiming for a verse. 5. Okay? You know, if you want to be honest about it, time starts to begin. Now, time existed, all right? But if you want to talk about a reckoning of time, time is not really put into effect until you get to the point where God created the light, God creates the darkness. He separates the light from the darkness, calls the light day, darkness night, and then there is that first day. Okay? Now, we come to the second day, and you notice that God creates an expanse, or some translations are going to say heaven. Well, this heaven is not talking about heaven where God lives. This heaven is really talking about this sky that is created, because what we see is that later on in the fifth day, the birds are flying in it. And so, you know, we're not talking about heaven where God lives. We're talking about heaven where the birds fly, or sky. And so what we've got is we've got water that's over the surface of the earth. And so the water is separated from the water, so that there's water on the globe of the earth, and there's water up in the sky or above it, and the expanse in between this is going to be where the birds fly. So he creates sky on the second day. Third day, what we see is that he pulls the waters from each other, and so waters are gathered together, which are created seas and create land. And also on that third day, we've got plants that are there, and so vegetation, plants bearing seeds according to their kinds, trees bearing fruit and seeds according to their kinds. And God saw it was good, and there was evening and morning the third day. And so in verse 4, number 14, what we see, it says, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky. Okay, so this lights that are there, not talking about, lighthouse beacons and airplanes and stuff like that. We're talking about lights as far as the sun, moon, and the stars. Okay? In verse number, or on, excuse me, on the fifth day, starting in verse number 20, what we see is that sea life is created, and also birds that are created there. And then the sixth day, what we see is that the land animals are created, and then all of a sudden we've got Adam and Eve that were created on the sixth day. Now, we oftentimes talk about the 7 days of creation, but we need to understand that the earth was created in 6 days, not 7 days, because what happened on the seventh day? God rested. And so there was nothing done on the seventh day, right? Nothing was created on the seventh day because God rested on the seventh day, okay? Okay, so we're all up on the Genesis account of creation, right? You know, there it is, chapter 1 in a nutshell. Now, let's go on back to some of our points to know. So, as far as points to know, the first point that we need to understand tonight is that science cannot have all the answers, because science only looks at what is natural, not supernatural. So if you think about what science is going to be the discipline where you look at nature, not just simply, you know, rocks and everything like that, but you look at the natural order of things, and you try to determine truth from that natural order. Now, what we talked about several weeks ago, you remember we've got truth, right? Okay. And we've got science. And the question that I asked a couple weeks ago is this: can you get to truth from science?
Yes.
The answer is yes. You sure can. I mean, we have scientific discoveries and scientific advancements. At the same time, we've got the Bible. And can you get to truth from the Bible? Yes, you can, because the Bible is the word of truth. It is from God. Okay? Now, if somebody misunderstands science, can people deviate from truth if they do not understand things properly? Yes, they can. Can the same thing be said about the Bible? Yes, that's where we get false teachers, okay? So yes, people have looked at the Bible, they have misunderstood the Bible. It's not that the Bible's wrong, it's that they misunderstood it, and therefore they did not arrive at truth because they didn't understand it correctly. At the same time, if you look at what God has created, and if you understand what God has created, then you should be able to arrive at truth, right? Okay, now that doesn't always work. Now does it? Because obviously, like what I said before, we don't have all the answers. And so because we don't have all the answers, there's going to be mistakes and there's going to be errors. I mean, there are times, and I can't think of something off the top of my head. Well, yeah, I can too. For example, laws of motion. Do you know what the settled science was for the laws of motion prior to Newton? Now, this held true for about 1,400 years, by the way. The laws of motion, what people thought, this was science. As a matter of fact, a really, really smart guy that I know you've heard the name of came up with this. You want to know who came up with this idea? He is a smart man. And he's known for being a smart man. Anybody heard of Aristotle? Okay, so Aristotle's a smart man. This is what Aristotle thought. He thought that if an arrow was going through the air, okay, what would happen? Let me switch colors here. What would happen is that he understood that there was air in front of it and that the tip of the arrow would split the air, okay? Which, when you stop and think about it, hey, that's pretty smart, right? Because you can't see air, right? And if you think about it, the tip of the arrow really does split the air, okay? He said that the air then comes back behind it and pushes it, and thus the arrow is propelled through the air, okay? Now, like I said, that was scientific thought for 1,400 years, okay? Now, do we believe that now? No, because what Newton, when the apple fell on his head, came up with is, well, you've got the three laws of motion. An object rests, remains at rest unless enacted by some outside force. And my memory is escaping me what the other two laws of motion are. But anyway, you get the idea, right? Okay. It's the force was the bow that pushed the arrow originally, and it's actually the wind, the air, that is resisting it and eventually slowing it down, as well as gravity is. Okay? Okay. Gravity's not slowing it down, but gravity's pulling it to the earth, and then the earth is going to really slow it down. So there. Okay. Now you got the idea that, it's not that Aristotle was stupid. And the people that followed Aristotle, it's not that they were stupid, it's just that they didn't quite understand everything. It was settled science for 1,400 years, but then all of a sudden somebody came up with the idea of, hey, no, wait a minute, here's another way of looking at it. And to tell you the truth, physicists now are coming and looking at Newton's third law of motion and say, well, you know what, that works, but it starts to break down at the atomic and subatomic levels, so they're coming up with new laws of motion, as we speak. And so, as I say before, can you get to truth through science? Yes, but at the same time, can you go astray? Here's the problem when you use science only to arrive at truth, and that is science is going to be looking at this natural world, right? Are there things that are beyond this natural world? Yes, God. And so, as I was saying before, it really is a very foolish atheism. If you think about it, it's a very foolish position, because if you're thinking, hey, I've looked at all of these things and I don't see God, well, okay, you haven't looked at everything, number one. And if you were to look at the entire universe and you say, I've uncovered every rock and stone in the entire universe, and I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt that God doesn't exist, well, guess what? God doesn't and is not confined by space and time. And so the workings of God that we have are also not going to be confined with space and time. So what I'm trying to say is that, if somebody is looking at truth and trying to only use science for it, there's going to be some things that science just cannot answer, because it is not bound by these physical laws of space and time. It's not natural, it's supernatural, if you will. And not only that, but if science is going to come up with the premise of saying God doesn't exist, and then they set out to look at all of these other little things, then aren't you leaving out a very big part of the world? If science is going to be looking at all kinds of things in nature and trying to understand how things come about and how things work, but you are leaving out the very biggest part of nature, and you are purposefully excluding it and saying, we are not looking at that, that is completely out of the way, then, can you come up with truth? Yes, but at the same time, is it going to be the absolute answer? No, it's not. And especially when you look at things in regards to evolution. I think that evolution, and this is just what I kind of think. I think that in time, whether that's going to be, 50 years, 100 years, 500 years, at some point, I think that scientists are going to look back at our modern understanding of evolution and say, man, those people were really stupid. Okay? And it's not that the people themselves are stupid. They are very intellectually smart. But they're ignoring some very obvious things that we just talked about. Evolution really does have some very big problems with it. The very biggest problem, what we talked about last week, is it really never settles with the answer of where life began, does it? It is a theory of what happened to life, but it never answers the question of where life began. And here's the thing, if you're going to have a study about life and you don't know where life came from, then how accurate is that study going to be, right? So there's big problem number one. Big problem number two is just simply this, and that is that there are some gaps and inconsistencies as far as evolution goes. With evolution, if you're talking about, like a single cell that's going to be, adapting to its environment and survival of the fittest and becoming more complex with things. And so then that organism, survival of the fittest, adapts and becomes more complex and everything like that. You would think that as you look at evolution, you would see a general progress, right? And if not that, you would think that as the complexity of things, you might think of it as, kind of an exponential curve, because with more organisms and the diversity of organisms, and they're all evolving, because they're all in the same environment, you would think that there would be a, kind of a ballooning of things. But as far as the fossil record goes, it's neither of those things. As a matter of fact, if you had a timeline of where the fossils come into play and the complexity of it, it's like this. Okay, there's gaps that are in there. Scientists will say, well, there are periods of time in which this evolution took place, but there's gaps in the middle, and you're kind of thinking, well, wait a minute, why? Why do you have these these periods in history where this evolution explosions take place, but then you don't have anything. You know, you would expect to find something like this, and instead you have something like that. And not only that, but what you find is you don't have any jumps. You don't find any jumps from species to species. You know, have you ever heard the missing link? Okay, it's not the missing link, it's the missing links, because there's a bunch of them that's there. And so you've got things that are inconsistent, you've got some things that have gaps in it, and so because of that, you kind of think, maybe with all of that, science is not necessarily the place to go through absolutely to land at truth in this regard. Okay? All right, second point is this. But what about the dinosaurs, right? You know, that is the question that a lot of people ask. Okay, well, you know, hey, look, we've got the dinosaurs there. We've got these fossils there. You know, so what about the dinosaurs? To tell you the truth, if we didn't have that question, we wouldn't have all kinds of different diversification of thought in regards to creation account. As a matter of fact, if we didn't have that question, we would look at the book of Genesis chapter 1 and we'd say, well, how to get here? Well, it says right here, right? You know, I mean, that's pure, plain, and simple, okay? But because we've got this question about where are the dinosaurs, we've got a lot of diversity about things that are out there so far. Am I putting anybody to sleep? Everybody with me so far? Anybody? Do you need to ask a question or have a comment to this point? Yeah, go ahead.
What do you think the Leviathan was?
We're going to get into that. Okay. All right. No, seriously, we'll talk about that in just a second. Okay. I'll make it. I wasn't going to talk about that, but I will talk about that. All right. Okay. But it works better to talk about it here in just a little bit than to jump right in there. But, you know, you say, you know, well, what about the dinosaurs? Well, there's some people who think that the Leviathan is a dinosaur. So, okay. All right. Here are, and, you know, these are kind of my terms for things. And so, you know, some people say, well, I don't, that's stupid. Why do you say that? Well, it's because I couldn't think of better terms. But when you go and take a look at, you know, how we got here, there's a variety of thought. It's kind of a spectrum from one end to the other end. And on the one end, what we've got is going to be an evolutionary atheist. Again, you say, oh, that's a lot of words and everything. That just seems like too much. Well, I try to come up with other things. I couldn't really think of a better word other than to say that. Evolutionary atheist, okay? All right, so from there, what we've got is, by the way, everybody understand what an evolutionary atheist is? Oh yeah, it's somebody who believes in evolution and they are an atheist. Okay, from there we've got evolutionary deist. Now we get to a little better or different description here. What is in the world is an evolutionary deist? Okay, if you remember, a deist is going to be somebody who believes that there's some sort of supernatural power out there, but that power does not have any connection to mankind. And so, you know, maybe this is a super alien, maybe this is a god, but this god really doesn't have a whole lot of connection to humanity, and therefore, you know, the god really is not expecting us to really worship him. Some, I wouldn't say all, but some intelligent design can fall into this group right here of saying, yes, we've got evolution from you know, this point forward, but it was started by something that we don't understand, some sort of super being, some sort of supernatural being, and so, you know, you've got that idea, okay? All right. Then from there, we're going to go to an evolutionary theist. You guys remember what a theist is, don't you? A theist is somebody who believes in God. Okay? And so an evolutionary theist, as opposed to an evolutionary deist, is going to say, okay, we see that there is evolution from this point forward, but God created it. That's God. You know, that super being is God himself. And so, you know, God intended to do it. He did it for a reason. He created it, and we see evidence of God in creation. Okay? Now, from there, what we are going to go to is, we could say that instead of evolutionary theist, we could say an evolutionary creationist, because we're going to say that, you know, God created things. But from there, we're going to go on to our last category, a biblical creationist. Okay. Biblical creationist is going to be one who says, you know what, I don't subscribe to evolution, because instead what I'm doing is I'm looking to the Bible. Okay. Now, does a biblical creationist, are they somebody who is going to be completely shunning science? No, they are not. Okay, so I don't want you to think that, you know, we're so far on that spectrum here that, you know, if we're going to put science, and that's why I did not do this, but if we're going to say science and Bible, you know, that, oh, these people over here on this end of the spectrum, you know, they only rely on science, which, you know, really that does. You know, and these people over here, they're only relying on the Bible. Well, no, actually not. There's a Creationist Museum in Kentucky. You know, I guess the Noah's Ark is in Kentucky, and the Creationist Museum is in Ohio, right? I think. You know, oh, is it in Kentucky too? Okay. Anyway, it's up there somewhere. You know, and so you've got people who do that. Okay. Now, as far as biblical creationists go, I'll just make mention that there are old Earth creationists, and there are also young Earth creationists. Oops. Okay, we're going to talk about that in just a second, a little bit, when we get into the Leviathan. All right. Okay. Now, as far as you know, a view of Genesis, how about the evolutionary atheists? What do you suppose their view on Genesis chapter 1 is going to be? No. Right? You know, no way. All right. What about an evolutionary deist? Say maybe a question mark. You know, these people, they may say, well, you know, there might be something there. They may say it's like a myth, right? They may say there may be some element there, but, you know, for the most part, they're relying more on science, and they're not going to be looking at Genesis. What were you going to say, Paul?
Do you think everyone, like agnostic, there might be a God, might not be?
Yeah, somebody who is a agnostic, not with the intent of there is no way of knowing God, but an agnostic who is saying, I don't know if there is a God, and it's hard, it's almost impossible for me to know there's a God. They would be falling into this category maybe, too. Okay? What about an evolutionary theist? How are they going to be viewing, boy, my graph is getting sloppy here. How are they going to be viewing Genesis? How about figurative, right? Okay. What they're going to be saying is they're going to be saying, well, okay, it's part of the Bible, and it's, since the Bible is God's word, to a degree. That's what they're going to say. Since the Bible is to a degree God's word, therefore we can't really take it and interpret it literally, because if we would be over here. Right? And so what they're going to do is they're going to say, well, maybe there are some things that are symbolic there. All right? Do you have or do you see any problems with interpreting Genesis chapter 1 as being symbolic? There's a real big thing with it, and that is when you look at Genesis chapter 1, chapter 2 follows chapter 1, chapter 3 follows chapter 2. And what happens in Genesis chapter 3? Fall of man in sin. And so if Adam and Eve are just simply figures of humanity, then does that mean that sin is figurative as well? You see the logic there? You see the problem with that logic as well. There's going to be some other people who say, oh, well, okay, the Bible is, let me get back to my graph here. The Bible is, God's word is true, but God didn't really mean for this to be translated literally. Instead, these days that are there are really just epochs of time. Do you have problems with following the logic if these are epochs of time? Instead of day 1 is 24 hours, which, by the way, each and every single day it says there was evening and there was morning, the first day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, okay? And so unless the earth was spinning very, 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 very slowly on its axis, Moses intended for day 1 to be a 24-hour period. But let's just say that we overlook that fact. Do you see some logic here that is missing? Because after all, what they're going to do is they say, oh, well, look, we've got land and plants that comes before seed life and birds, which, as far as evolution goes, that is in order. And then we've got land animals, that's in order right there. And so these are just simply talking about epochs of time, right? You see any other problems with this? When was the sun created? Exactly. Okay. So if that's what the meaning of Genesis was, then it really doesn't make any sense, does it? It's pretty silly. You need all of it. You need all of it. You need all of it occurring in a very quick, orderly time period. And so when you take a look at, this idea about a creationist, evolutionary theist, or, an evolutionary Christian, because really this is what we're talking about, is more in Christian circles. There's going to be people out there that claim to be Christians, and they really may be saved, but they're going to say, oh no, I lean toward science, and I believe in the theory of evolution. But if you go that route, then how you're going to be interpreting Genesis is you're going to be interpreting Genesis figuratively. And if you interpret Genesis figuratively, then chances are you might be interpreting some other things in the Bible figuratively too. One good rule of Bible interpretation is this: look at everything literal unless it specifies that you need to look at it differently. Okay? Not everything in the Bible is literal. You take a look at Psalms and you see that there are many figures of speech and poetry. When Jesus spoke the parables, those parables that he was speaking were not real. They were figures of speech. There are times that you look at the Bible and you say, oh, well, this is a figure of speech. This is not to be taken literally. This is supposed to be taken figuratively. But those things are obvious. All you have to do is just read it and use a little bit of common sense, which unfortunately we seem to be kind of short on these days. But you can just look at it and say, oh, wait a minute, no, this is figurative because of this reason. And if you don't have that, then you need to look at it literally. I mean, that's kind of a good rule of thumb. And so when you look at Genesis, you don't see anything as far as a figurative type thing. We wouldn't be having any of these discussions whatsoever if we didn't have to answer the question, what about the dinosaurs, right? Okay, so what about the dinosaurs? Well, real quick, you notice evolutionary atheists, they're going to be saying, no, God does not exist. Evolutionary deists, these are going to be more of the agnostics. They're going to be saying, yes, God exists because they're theists, but biblical creationists, they're going to be, yes, absolutely so, because God has done it all. Now, old earth creationists are just simply people that are not young earth creationists. You say, who are young earth creationists? Young earth creationists are people that think that the Bible or the creation began in 4004 BC. And you say, well, why do they come up with 4004 BC? They come up with 4004 BC because when you look at history, there is Usher, the Archbishop of Ireland, back in the 1700s, that was a historian. He was obviously an Anglican priest, and he started to come up with looking at Old Testament history, and he wasn't the first one to do this. There's other people who tried to, date things according to the Bible, but he kind of looked at certain days, mixing in secular dates with biblical dates. He looked at different kings, he looked at different things, and he just kind of piecemealed all of these things back together and calculated that the earth began in 4004 BC. I'm not going to show you all that calculation there because we're running short on time. But anyway, that's a young earth creationist. Old earth creationists are going to be people who say, no, I do believe in a literal account of Genesis. It's just that the book of Genesis is not meant to be 4004 BC. As a matter of fact, kind of coming back up here to this, you notice that I said the first time that time actually is calculated is here on the first day. And that if you look at this, and in the Hebrew language, you've got you've got a very simple conjunction that can be translated a variety of different ways. It can be translated and, it can be translated so, it can be translated then, it can be translated but, it can be translated even. It's just kind of, I think of it kind of like a placeholder, to just kind of separate things. And if you just put the phrases there, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Here's that conjunction. And the earth was formless and empty. Now we've got another one of those conjunctions. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. Another conjunction. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Another conjunction. And God said, let there be light. Could there be time? And I pose this as a question. I am neither a old earth creationist or a new earth creationist. I am a creationist, okay? There's going to be some people who get really mad at me because I'm not a young earth creationist. There's going to be, and have been, people who haven't said it to my face, but they said it with their actions of, considering me a heretic just simply because I didn't agree with them. Hey, that's the way it is. Usher, I don't agree with how he dated things, but that's okay. I don't agree with him on his plan of salvation either, so there's a lot of things that I'm going to disagree with him about. But if you look at it this regard, there could be all kinds of different time that's in here. And, when you look at the book of Genesis, chapter 1, there's something we need to understand that I think is very important. There is a lot that happened with creation that is not spelled out in the book of Genesis. We need to understand something, and that is science doesn't have all the answers. The Bible does not give all the answers. Okay? Just remember that. Science doesn't have it. Genesis doesn't give it. God could have, but he chose not to. Remember that what we're looking at with the Bible is more of a why and how question instead of a how it happened question. Okay? All right. Okay, I think I got on a little bit of a tangent there, but, what about the Leviathan? Okay, so in the book of Job, there is something that is called a Leviathan that's there. There's also something that's called a behemoth there in the book of Job. And people who are young Earth creationists will say the Leviathan and the behemoth are dinosaurs because it mentions it right there in the book of Job. I'm not saying that it can't be a dinosaur, okay? So if somebody wants to take issue with me, I'm not saying that it's not, but it doesn't have to be. And the reason is, plain and simple, that Leviathan is more going to be a figurative interpretation. When you look at Job and you see all the things that are going on with the Leviathan, you think, oh, this sounds kind of figurative, And when you look at Job, guess what? Job is a book of poetry. So, okay. Now, I'm not saying if you want to disagree with me, you can disagree with me. We can have a disagreement about that. And I'm not even going to say you're wrong because I don't want to get up to heaven and Job says, hey, you know what? You said, I'm going to say, well, Job, but I also said I didn't know, okay, because I really don't know. But I'm just saying that it doesn't have to be that way. Well, it is and it isn't, because it's talking about fire coming out of his eyes.
But who knows? I read a book, like deep in the water, there is fishes who has light.
Yeah.
Little bugs who has light. Who knows? We don't have big dinosaurs, but what if they could do something,
Well, right.
Like,
okay, so Olga,
you
again,
never
I'm not saying that it isn't. Okay?
Right.
I'm not saying
Me
it
too.
isn't.
I don't know. It's a question mark. I'm not saying, oh,
Yeah.
I don't know either.
But here's what I am saying, is that we should not put our faith in that. Now, okay, now this is the next point that I'm coming to, and that is, getting back to my question right here, this. Science can boost what we believe, but it should not be the source of what we believe, okay? When we start to, even in the creationist realm, if we start to make science the source of what we believe, then we are setting ourselves up to be knocked over, okay? Because I'm telling you, when you start to come to truth, you can come to truth with science, but given time, it could be that gets reversed, And you come up and you say, my basis of my faith, where I stand, is on what this science reveals, what this bit of archaeology reveals. Then what happens if that gets knocked over? Where's your faith then? You just got the support knocked out from under you, didn't you? If, however, you're looking at it and saying, I see this and I view this from an understanding of the Bible. Now, can our understanding of the Bible be wrong? Yeah, our understanding of the Bible can be wrong. But if we're looking at it and say, the best I understand, this is how I understand the Bible, then this is where I draw my faith, then guess what? We're on good ground. Now, we can refine that faith, and later on we can look at things and say, you know what, I never really thought about that before, but now I see it differently, and it's not that something gets knocked out from under us, it's that our faith gets refined, right? Because if we are really trying to understand the Bible, what it's doing is leading us to God, it's leading us to the truth about God, and so we don't have that kicked out from underneath us. Does that make sense? Okay. It's 5 after 8. Should we go on to very quickly look at discussion questions, or would you like to talk about these discussion questions later? We don't have kids that are interrupting us. We do have kid, but he's being good over there. Shall we, what's that?
He's good for now.
He's good for now? How about if we look at these things real quick, okay? 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse number 18. After all, if we're going to have Bible study, we might as well open the Bible and read it, because other than just looking at Genesis, we haven't really done much, have we? Okay, so 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse number 18. Okay, it says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Where is the wise man? Where is the scholar? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world?" Okay, so here's the discussion. And that is, do you think that sometimes God sets things up so that man's wisdom is shown to be foolish? Can you give examples of that? We've got one right here. That is the cross. Jesus dying on the cross. People in Paul's day thought it was foolish, thought the resurrection of the dead was foolish. Do you remember when we talked about in the book of Acts chapter 17 about when Paul was up there on Mars Hill? Okay. You notice that the Areopagus listened to Paul up until he mentioned the resurrection of the dead, and then you remember what they did? They sneered at him. Okay. Why would they sneer at him? Because they felt like the resurrection of the dead was just completely ridiculous. And for, somebody to bring up the resurrection of the dead, that's stupid. How ignorant can this person be? We, in our wisdom, we know that that can't possibly happen, right? Because we are looking at things through the natural side of it. Has anybody ever seen anybody been resurrected? Would you like to see somebody who has come up out of the ground dead in the current state that they are there? Okay. Okay, so you get the idea that, the wise men, and these people were intelligent men. I'm not saying that they weren't intelligent, but they were foolish. Okay, so when you look at it in that regard, and the reason why they're foolish, they weren't looking at it through a supernatural lens, that God could do it. So do you see any parallels with what we're talking about with evolution? Can God and has God set up things so that, people look at it and the foolishness of man is overshadowed by the wisdom of God? Yeah. And I'm not saying, that this is so or isn't so, but I just kind of always wonder about this, because I know that when Christians get to heaven, guess what? The number one question is probably going to be asked from Christians in the modern era. What about the dinosaurs, right? Okay. All right. So when I get my turn, God, what about the dinosaurs? I just wonder, what is going to be the reaction if he turns around and tells me, what dinosaurs? You didn't find any dinosaurs. You found fossils. And I put those fossils there so that you could have oil. That would be kind of interesting. Now, I'm not saying that dinosaurs didn't exist. I'm just saying, just stop and think about things that, for example, when were the trees created? Day 3. Okay. So on the 6th day, do you think that, an oak tree was, or do you think it was big? Okay. So how many days old was that oak tree? 1, 2, 3 days old, right? Okay. 3-day-old oak tree, but if you were to take a core sampling of the oak tree, how many rings would it have? Okay? So in other words, when God created things, he created things with the time element intact. Correct. He was an adult. Correct. Absolutely. So what I'm saying is that, it is going to be a fact that God did create things with the idea that, because God knows everything, with the idea that people are going to be looking at this stuff and looking at it through a natural lens and not, shunning out the supernatural. They all want to see what they want to see. And in the wisdom of God, the foolishness of man is going to be made known. Okay. Looking at Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 27, way back at the very beginning, what we have on that sixth day is this. In verse number 26, we see that it says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. And by the way, we've got male and female. We don't have all kinds of whatever. And by the way, if, you know what, I've been listening to stuff, and I will agree, sex is assigned by God when he created us. Okay? Sex was assigned by God when he created us. All of us who have been descended from Adam and Eve, our gender is encoded in our DNA. It is not assigned to us at birth. Okay? The only time it was assigned when God assigned it, when he created male and he created female. Okay? All right. So, male, female, he created them. Here's the question. What makes life, human life, different than other life?
Spirit, made like God. He's like.
Because he,
No other one of God's creation was created in the likeness and the image of God. Well, now, he breathed the breath of life into the other animals, too. It's not the breath of life.
nothing.
The breath of life is what animated Adam in chapter 2. But the very fact that he created Adam and Eve in the likeness and in his likeness and his image, that's what distinguishes us.
We're a Trinity, just like him.
Exactly. So, when you think about it in that regard, why would modern day science have trouble accepting this or understanding this? If they're not going to believe in God, if they're going to exclude God from their reasoning and their logic, then are they really going to understand what God's creation is that's been created in his likeness and his image? No. Okay. Last but not least, let's take a look at Psalm chapter 8, verses 3 and 4, which is...
Another note on that is that people today go further and they want the animals to have spirit.
Yes. And to have rights and to say that they are on equal playing field with us. But when you read that, this is something that's going to trigger some people today. We are over creation. God has put us over creation. When you look at us and you look at everything else under this creation, you see that there is a difference. It's a big difference, and it's not the same. No. Well, we are supposed to take care of it. And so if we're supposed to take care of it, that's not talking about abusing it, right? Okay, real quick. Psalm 8, 3 and 4. It says, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, the son of man that you should care for him?" Man, just stop and let that kind of sink in for a little bit. And that is, you think about all the wonders of the universe, the wonders of this creation, and then there's us, right? We've got a special place with God. And the reason why we have a special place with God is because we were created in his likeness and his image. And that is really something great. Okay. All right. Questions and comments? Wrapping things up. Yeah.
I'm sorry, when you were showing the days,
Yeah.
the very first day is light,
Uh-huh.
but then on the,
Yep.
there's also the other light.
Yes.
Yep. Confusing, isn't it?
Yes.
I'll give you my answer, and maybe my answer's right, maybe my answer's wrong, but this is what I think. I think that this is from the perspective of the inhabitants of Earth, okay? And so as far as if, and this is an if there is time that existed before this, and by the way, there is time that existed before that first day. How much time, I don't know. But, you know, the counting of time happened with the morning and evening, all right? Okay, so assuming that there is time that happened before that, and who knows what happened, who knows how much time, who knows what was in existence during that time. You could have planets, you could have stars that are out there. It's just that it's not visible from Earth because, as what we see here, that the Earth was formless and empty and darkness was over the surface of the deep and the Spirit of God was hovering. And so it's like everything is blocked off from the Earth. It's there, but it's blocked off. And so there is a lightning there to the point where the light from the sun can start to hit. And so there is lightness and there's dark. Light on one side of the planet, dark on the other side of the planet. It's not so much that if you were on the earth and looking, you could see that, you know, it's not like you could see the sun or you could see the moon or anything like that, because, you know, the waters there, the thickness of the spirit of hovering over the earth and everything like that, okay? Now, again, that's what I'm thinking. Okay, that is when everything became visible, that you could visibly see the sun and the moon and the stars. Now, again, that's just what I'm thinking. I could be wrong about that. I know somebody has another answer for it, whether that's in this room or, you know, out there somewhere. I know that there's another answer. It's just that that's what I think when I read it.
Light is energy, and lights is the clumping of, you know, like,
Yes.
so that
Yeah.
could be the difference.
Yeah. I mean, it's the difference of this. Is there light in this room? Yeah, it is. Okay. If there was something covering these lights, could we still, I mean, if it was somewhat translucent, could we still have light in this room? But could we see where the light is coming from? No, but then when that's removed, it's like, well, yeah, I've got light here, but I've also see light there. Okay. All right. Other questions and comments?
So light is the key.
Well, Jesus is the light of the world, and Jesus is absolutely the key.
Mm-hmm.
I read like light and darkness, it could be spiritual. It does not have to be
On
physical.
day number one,
Oh,
there is a physical manifestation of it
Physical.
because we've got evening, which is a physical reality.
Oh,
We've got
okay.
morning, which is a physical reality. We've got the first day. So the globe is spinning. Yes. Now, I mean, maybe there's, you know.
People don't know how to explain.
Now, you wonder why it's like this, right? You have to understand that Moses, God inspired Moses to write the book of Genesis. Moses wrote the book of Genesis starting out to people who came out of Egyptian bondage. And in all of these things, people who grew up in Egypt understood the creation account from the religion of the Egyptians. Okay? And so the very biggest God in Egyptology was what? Ra, the sun god, yet he's created not, he's created on day 4, right? Okay? Now, I'm not saying that wasn't so. I mean, it was created on day 4 in that regard. And by the way, when you look where it says, let there be, that's a coming into an existence or a realization of an existence. So, I mean, that was a creation on day 4, not day 1, which probably would have surprised a lot of Israelites. Other questions and comments? I mean, we could talk about this a lot, right? Okay, let's pray and go home then. Dear Lord in heaven, thank you for everything you've given us. Thank you for your blessings, and thank you for your word. Thank you for its guidance and its wisdom. Lord, please help us to understand it with a pure and sincere mind. And Lord, help us to not just simply know facts, but help us to understand you and your purposes and your plans. Lord, please help us to follow you. Help us to be used by you for your kingdom's sake. Forgive us of our sins, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.